For 4 long years, Daniel lived a life that slowly erased who he used to be. Every morning began the same way, the sound of an old alarm, echoing through a cramped apartment that never truly felt like home. The air was cold, the walls were thin, and the silence was heavier than anything he had ever known. He worked in a foreign country where no one knew his name. To them, he was just another worker, replaceable, invisible. But none of that mattered to him, because every drop of sweat, every aching muscle, every sleepless night had a purpose. Her, Mira, the woman he left behind, the woman who once held his hands and promised, "No matter how long it takes, I'll wait." That sentence became his strength. On his worst days, when his body felt like giving up, when loneliness hit the hardest, he would take out his phone and stare at her photo, smiling, soft, unchanged. At least, that's what he believed. Every month, without fail, Daniel sent money back home, sometimes more than he could afford. He skipped meals, worked overtime, took extra shifts that others refused, not because he had to, but because he wanted to build something, a future, a better life, a home where he and Mira could finally live without struggle. He imagined it so many times. Her cooking in the kitchen, her laughter filling the house, her waiting at the door. The day he returned, that image kept him alive. 4 years. 4 years of sacrifice. 4 years of holding on to a promise that existed only in his heart. Until finally, the day came, the day he had been waiting for. Daniel stood in the middle of his small room, staring at his packed bag. It wasn't much, just a few clothes, some small gifts, and memories he couldn't leave behind. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from excitement. "I'm going home," he whispered to himself. For the first time in years, he smiled. He took one last look at the room that witnessed his struggle, the sleepless nights, the silent tears, the moments no one ever saw. Then he turned away and walked out. He didn't know that the life he was returning to was no longer the life he left behind, and the person he had been waiting for was no longer waiting for him. The journey home felt longer than the 4 years Daniel had spent away. He sat by the window, watching the world pass him by. Cities turned into highways, highways into small roads, and small roads into something he hadn't seen in years. Familiarity, his village, the place he once called home. His hands rested on a worn-out bag sitting on his lap. Inside it were simple things. Nothing luxurious, nothing expensive. But to Daniel, they meant everything. A soft scarf he carefully chose for Mira after walking through countless stores. A small watch he saved up for months just to buy. And a few other things. Pieces of his struggle, wrapped in quiet love. He imagined her reaction, her smile, her eyes lighting up the moment she saw him standing at the door. He even imagined her running toward him, holding him, crying, laughing, telling him how much she missed him. That image replayed over and over again in his mind. It felt so real, so close, that he didn't notice the uneasiness slowly growing inside his chest. As the bus entered the village, something felt different, not wrong, just unfamiliar. The roads were still there, the small shops, the houses lined up just like before, but everything felt slightly changed, like a place that moved forward. While he stayed behind, the bus finally stopped. Daniel stepped down slowly, his shoes touching the ground he hadn't walked on for years. He inhaled deeply. The air felt warmer, closer, real. "I'm home," he whispered again, almost as if he needed to convince himself. Step by step, he walked through the village. Some people glanced at him. A few seemed to recognize him, but there was something strange in their expressions. It wasn't just surprise. It wasn't just curiosity. It was something else. Something Daniel couldn't quite understand. He smiled politely, nodding as he passed them. But deep inside, that uneasy feeling began to grow stronger. Finally, he reached it. His house, or at least, what used to be his house. Daniel stopped walking. His eyes widened slightly. The house looked different. New paint, a cleaner yard, a gate that definitely wasn't there before. It looked better, much better. For a moment, pride filled his chest. "She did this," he thought. "All of this? She did it with the money I sent." A small smile formed on his face. Everything he sacrificed, it was worth it. He stepped closer, but then he noticed something. Parked just outside the house was a car he had never seen before. It didn't belong there, at least not in his memory. Daniel stopped. His smile slowly faded. His eyes fixed on the car. Clean, well maintained. Definitely not something that came from the life he left behind. A strange feeling crept into his chest. Tight, uncomfortable, unfamiliar. He looked at the house again, then at the car, then back at the house. Something wasn't right, and for the first time since he arrived, Daniel hesitated. His hand, which was about to knock on the door, paused midair. That feeling in his chest, it wasn't excitement anymore. It wasn't happiness. It was something else. Something darker, something heavier, something he couldn't explain. But somehow, deep down, he already feared. Because sometimes, before the truth reveals itself, your heart already knows something is wrong. Daniel stood frozen in front of the door, his hand still hovering in the air. For a brief moment, everything inside him told him to stop, to turn around, to walk away before whatever was waiting behind. That door had the chance to change everything. But he couldn't. Not after 4 years. Not after everything he had sacrificed. Slowly, he knocked. Once. The sound echoed louder than it should have. He waited. Nothing. He knocked again, this time a little harder. Still nothing. A quiet tension began to build in his chest. The footsteps, soft at first, then clearer, coming closer. Daniel held his breath. The door slowly opened, and there she was, Mira, standing right in front of him. For a second, time stopped. 4 years of distance, gone in an instant. She looked exactly the same, or at least, that's what he wanted to believe. Her hair slightly longer, her face still familiar, but her eyes were different. There was no warmth, no excitement, no tears, only shock. Daniel, her voice came out almost like a whisper, as if she wasn't sure whether he was real or just something from the past that suddenly appeared. Daniel smiled, a genuine smile, the kind he hadn't shown in years. I'm home, he said softly. He waited for her to run into his arms, waited for her to cry, waited for something, anything, that would tell him she still felt the same. But she didn't move, not even a step. Her body stayed exactly where it was, frozen, just like him. The silence between them grew heavier, uncomfortable, strange. And then, something even stranger happened. Mira glanced back, just for a second, but Daniel saw it. That one small movement felt louder than anything else. His smile slowly faded. A quiet tension filled the air. Can I come in? Daniel asked. Mira hesitated, just for a second, but that second was enough. Yeah, she finally said, stepping aside. Daniel walked in, and immediately, something felt wrong. The house looked better, cleaner, more organized, but it didn't feel like his. It didn't feel like the place he had been dreaming about all these years. It felt unfamiliar, like he was stepping into someone else's life. Then he saw it, a pair of shoes near the corner. Men's shoes, not his. His chest tightened. Slowly, he lifted his gaze, and that's when he saw him. A man, sitting comfortably on the sofa, relaxed, calm, as if he belonged there, as if this was his home. The man looked up, their eyes met, and in that moment, everything inside Daniel went silent. No anger, no shouting, just silence. The kind of silence that happens when your mind is trying to understand something your heart already knows. The man stood up, casually, without hesitation, without fear. That confidence said everything. I've heard a lot about you, the man said, extending his hand slightly. Daniel didn't move. He didn't shake it, didn't even respond. His eyes shifted slowly toward Mira, looking at her, searching for something, an explanation, a denial, anything. But all he saw was guilt, heavy, unavoidable. And in that moment, Daniel realized something he had been trying to ignore since he saw that car outside. He didn't come home, he arrived too late. Because sometimes, the scariest truth isn't what you see, but what you finally understand. The air inside the house felt suffocating. No one spoke for a few seconds, but somehow, everything had already been said. Daniel stood there, his bag still in his hand, his eyes locked on Mira, waiting, not for excuses, not for lies, but for the truth. Even if it hurt, even if it destroyed everything he had been holding on to for the past 4 years. Who is he? Daniel finally asked. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes before something breaks. Mira didn't answer immediately. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Her hands trembled, her eyes avoided his, and that alone said more than any explanation ever could. He's just a friend, she said quietly. Just a friend. Those 3 words echoed in Daniel's mind, over and over again, louder each time. But something about the way she said it felt wrong. Forced. Empty. The man beside her let out a small breath, almost like he was amused. Then he stepped forward, confident, relaxed, like he had nothing to hide. "Name's Adrian," he said, offering his hand again, this time more directly. Daniel glanced at his hand, then back at his face. Still, he didn't respond, didn't shake it, didn't acknowledge it. Instead, he asked another question. "How long has he been here?" This time his voice was colder, sharper, more direct. Mira froze. Her breathing became uneven. "Daniel, it's not what you think." "How long?" he repeated, cutting her off. No anger, no raised voice. But the pressure behind those words was impossible to ignore. Adrian slowly lowered his hand. The faint smile on his face didn't disappear. If anything, it became more subtle, more dangerous. Mira looked at Daniel again, her eyes now filled with something else. Fear, not fear of him, but fear of the truth finally coming out. I didn't plan this," she whispered. That sentence hit harder than anything else. Daniel let out a quiet breath, almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "I didn't ask if you planned it," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I asked, how long?" Silence. Heavy, unbearable. Seconds felt like minutes. And then, she looked down. That one small movement was enough. Daniel nodded slowly, as if he finally understood. Not the details, not the full story, but the truth. The one thing he had been trying to avoid since he stepped into that house. "You could have told me," he said quietly, his voice softer now. Not because he forgave her, but because something inside him was starting to shut down. "I would have understood." Mira's eyes widened. Tears began to form. "No, you wouldn't." "Try me," Daniel replied. For a moment, she said nothing, because deep down, she knew he was right. He would have understood. He would have accepted it. He would have let her go, but she didn't give him that choice. Instead, she let him believe. For 4 years, Adrian finally spoke again. "You've been gone a long time," he said calmly. Daniel slowly turned his head toward him. "And you didn't waste any time," Daniel replied. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, it was no longer just about Mira. It was something else now. Something deeper, something heavier, something that couldn't be fixed. Mira stepped forward suddenly. "Please, both of you, stop." But it was already too late, because the truth was no longer hiding. It was standing right there, between them, clear, ugly, unavoidable. And Daniel finally understood something that hurt more than anything else. It wasn't just that she moved on. It wasn't just that someone else took his place. It was the fact that she let him fight for a future that no longer existed. And sometimes, the deepest pain isn't betrayal. It's realizing you were the only one still believing. That night, the house felt quieter than it ever had before. But for Daniel, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, unbearable. He sat alone in what used to be his room, or at least, a room that still carried traces of the past he once believed in. The walls were different. The furniture had changed. Even the smell felt unfamiliar. It was like everything had been replaced. Everything, except him. His bag lay open on the floor, untouched. The gifts he brought for Mira were still inside, carefully wrapped, never opened, never given. And now they felt meaningless. He leaned back slowly, resting his head against the wall. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, but his mind was anything but quiet. Every memory came rushing back. The long shifts, the sleepless nights, the cold mornings where he forced himself to get up when his body begged him to stop. All of it, played over and over again like a film he couldn't pause. "All for what?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Not angry, not even sad, just empty. From the other side of the house, he could hear something. At first it was faint, almost unnoticeable, but then it became clear. Laughter, soft, light, familiar. Mira's laughter. Daniel froze. His breathing slowed. He didn't move, didn't speak, just listened. That sound, it used to mean everything to him. It used to be the one thing that made all his struggles worth it. But now, it felt different. Because it wasn't for him. It wasn't because of him. It belonged to someone else now. And that realization cut deeper than any words ever could. He closed his eyes slowly, as if shutting out the world would somehow make it disappear. But it didn't. The laughter continued, echoing through the walls, through his chest, through every part of him that was still holding on. He clenched his fist tightly, not out of anger, but out of something far more painful, helplessness. Because no matter what he did, He couldn't go back. He couldn't change what had already happened. He couldn't undo the years he spent away, and he couldn't bring back the person Mira used to be. Or maybe she was always like this. Maybe he just never saw it. A slow breath escaped his lips, then another, trying to steady himself, trying to hold on to whatever was left inside him. But it was getting harder, much harder. He opened his eyes again. The ceiling looked the same, but everything else felt different. His thoughts slowed down, not because he found peace, but because something inside him was starting to break, quietly, slowly, without sound. And the scariest part was, he didn't even know which hurt more, the fact that she had changed, or the fact that he was still the same. Still holding on, still hoping, still loving someone who no longer belonged to him. The laughter in the other room finally faded. The house fell silent again. But this time, the silence felt even heavier, because now there was nothing left to distract him from the truth. And that truth sat right there, in the middle of his chest, unmoving, unforgiving, unavoidable. And sometimes, the hardest part isn't letting go. It's realizing you're the only one who hasn't. The morning came, but it didn't feel like a new beginning. For Daniel, it felt like a continuation of something he didn't want to face. He hadn't slept, not even for a moment. His eyes were tired, but his mind refused to rest. Every time he closed them, he heard it again. That laughter, that sound that once gave him strength, now slowly tearing him apart from the inside. He sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Quiet, still, as if moving even slightly would make everything more real than it already was. But eventually, he knew he couldn't avoid it. Not anymore. If there was something left to understand, something left to hear, it had to be now. Daniel stood up slowly. His body felt heavy, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of everything he was carrying inside. Step by step, he walked out of the room. The house was quiet, too quiet, until he reached the kitchen. Mira was there, standing by the counter, her back facing him. She didn't turn around immediately, but she knew he was there. "I couldn't sleep," Daniel said, his voice calm, flat, empty. Mira slowly turned around. Her eyes were swollen, red. She had been crying, but even that didn't change anything, because some damage goes beyond tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, the same words, repeated, meaningless now. Daniel shook his head slightly. "I didn't come here for that," he said. No anger, no frustration, just a quiet refusal. He stepped closer, not too close, just enough to look at her clearly. "Tell me the truth," he continued. Mira's lips trembled. Her hands gripped the edge of the table tightly, as if she needed something to hold on to, because she knew, once she said it, there would be no turning back. She tried to speak, but the words didn't come easily. Daniel didn't interrupt, didn't rush her, because this time, he wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for closure. "I was lonely," she finally said. The simplest answer, but also the most painful one. Daniel blinked slowly. Lonely. That word echoed in his mind, over and over. "I was alone here." For so long, she continued, her voice shaking. "You were far away. You were never here." Daniel let out a quiet breath. Not angry, not defensive, just tired. "I was working," he said softly. "For us?" Mira closed her eyes. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I know." And for a moment, everything went silent again, because both of them knew that wasn't the real reason. Loneliness wasn't the truth. It was just the excuse. Daniel took another step back, creating distance, not just physically, but emotionally. "How long?" he asked again. This time, his voice was even quieter, almost like he was afraid of the answer. Mira hesitated. Her breathing became uneven. Her eyes avoided his once more. And then, barely above a whisper, 2 years. Daniel froze. 2 years. Half of the time he was gone. Half of his sacrifice. Already meaningless. He nodded slowly, not because he accepted it, but because he finally understood the timeline of his own loss. "So for 2 years, he said quietly, "I've been sending money, working, believing." His voice trailed off. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Mira broke down. "I didn't know how to tell you." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw her clearly, not as the woman he loved, but as the person she had become. "You didn't want to tell me," he corrected, calm, precise, and painfully honest. That hit harder than anything else, because it was true, and they both knew it. Another silence filled the space between them. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't confusion anymore. It wasn't doubt. It was clarity. Cold. Sharp. Final. Daniel exhaled slowly, then nodded once more, as if something inside him had finally settled. Not healed, but settled. Okay, he said. Just one word, but it carried everything. Acceptance, pain, and the beginning of letting go. Mira looked at him, confused. Okay, she repeated. Daniel turned away slightly, his eyes no longer searching for answers, because there was nothing left to ask. You made your choice, he said quietly, and now I understand. And in that moment, something invisible between them finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. And sometimes, closure doesn't come with answers. It comes when you stop asking. The days that followed didn't feel real. Everything moved, but Daniel didn't. He walked through the village like a ghost, present, but not truly there. People greeted him. Some smiled, some nodded, some even tried to start conversations. Hey, you're back? It's been a long time. You must have made a lot of money out there. Normal words. Friendly tones, but behind those eyes, Daniel felt something else. Something they didn't say out loud. They knew that was the part that hurt the most. Not just the betrayal, not just the truth, but the realization that everyone else had already seen it coming, while he was the only one still believing in a story that no longer existed. He stopped in front of a small shop, the same place he used to visit years ago. Nothing had changed. Same wooden bench, same old sign, but when he sat down, it didn't feel the same. A few men nearby glanced at him, whispering, quietly, but not quiet enough. That's him, right? The one who worked abroad. Yeah, poor guy. Daniel looked down. His hands rested on his knees, still, tight. He didn't react, didn't confront them. Because what would he say? That they were wrong? That everything was fine? He couldn't, because they weren't wrong, and nothing was fine. A bitter smile slowly appeared on his face, not because something was funny, but because something inside him had finally accepted reality. This wasn't just his pain anymore. It had become a story people talked about, a story people watched from the outside, a story where he was the only one who didn't know the ending. Until now, he stood up slowly, brushed the dust off his pants, and walked away. No destination, no purpose, just moving, because standing still felt worse. As he passed through the streets, memories started to hit him harder. Every corner, every house, every place had a version of him in it, a younger version, a hopeful version, a version that believed love was enough. He stopped walking, right in the middle of a quiet road. The wind passed gently, but it felt cold, not on his skin, but somewhere deeper. He looked around. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't, because he wasn't the same person anymore. And maybe that was the hardest truth to accept. Not that Mira had changed, not that someone else took his place, but that the life he had been holding on to was already gone long before he came back. A child ran past him, laughing, carefree, without a single worry. Daniel watched silently, and for a brief second, he remembered what it felt like to be that free. Before responsibility, before sacrifice, before promises that slowly turned into chains. He took a deep breath, but it didn't feel enough. Nothing felt enough, because no matter where he went, no matter how far he walked, he couldn't escape one thing, himself, and the truth he carried inside, that heavy, quiet truth that followed him everywhere, reminding him, again and again, that while he was fighting to hold everything together, everything had already fallen apart, and everyone else had already moved on. Except him, he closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. This time, there was no confusion left, no denial, no hope, just clarity, cold, sharp, and undeniable. He wasn't just late, he was too late. And sometimes, the pain isn't in losing everything. It's in realizing you were the last one to know it was already gone. One evening, Daniel returned home earlier than usual. The village was quiet. The sun had just begun to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the streets. Everything looked familiar, yet nothing felt right. As he approached the house, he noticed the door slightly ajar. A faint light spilled out into the dark yard. He froze. Something inside him warned him, not a feeling of safety, but a whisper of dread. Stepping closer, he could hear it. Laughter. Clear, joyful, unmistakable. Mira's laughter. A sound that had once been music to his ears. now felt like a knife sliding through his chest. Daniel's hands clenched instinctively. His heartbeat accelerated, not with fear, but with a pain that seemed to echo in every bone of his body. He didn't open the door. He didn't need to, because just by standing there, he understood everything. Every smile he had imagined, every moment he had hoped to share, had been taken, and now it was happening. Without him, slowly he pressed his back against the wall beside the doorway. Carefully, he peered inside. There they were, Mira and Adrian, sitting close on the sofa, not just close, intimate, talking softly, laughing as if Daniel didn't exist, as if he had never returned, as if the past 4 years, all his sacrifices, were invisible. Daniel swallowed hard. His throat was dry. He wanted to speak, to scream, to demand answers, but no words came. Because sometimes, words aren't enough. Because sometimes, the truth is louder than anything you could say. He took a step back, then another. His mind raced. 4 years of hardship, 4 years of hope, all leading to this moment. And now, there was nothing left but reality. The reality that Mira had changed. That someone else had stepped into the place he had reserved only for himself. His hands shook, but he forced himself to stay calm, to stay silent, to observe. Because he needed to see the full picture before making a move. He didn't want assumptions. He didn't want doubts. He wanted the truth. And here it was, right in front of him. Bigger, clearer, unavoidable. His chest felt tight. His heart pounded painfully. Every step he had taken to come home, every sleepless night abroad, every moment of sacrifice, seemed meaningless now. But deep down, he already knew there would be no turning back, no miracle, no second chance. Not now, not ever. For the first time in years, Daniel felt completely powerless. And yet, in that powerless moment, a strange calm washed over him. Because finally, the truth wasn't hidden. It wasn't delayed. It wasn't postponed. It was right there, waiting, clear, harsh, and unavoidable. He let out a slow breath, and in the silence that followed, he realized something terrifying. Sometimes, the hardest part of coming home is realizing you no longer have a home to come back to. And sometimes, the worst betrayal isn't what someone else did. It's what you waited for all alone that never was. That night, Daniel packed his bag, not slowly, not hesitantly, but deliberately, each movement precise, as if he was marking the end of something that had already ended long before. The gifts he had brought for Mira, carefully wrapped scarves, the small watch he saved months for, he left untouched. He didn't hand them over. He didn't even place them where she could see. They were reminders of a life he no longer belonged to. Mira appeared in the doorway, her eyes red, swollen from crying. She opened her mouth, perhaps to say something, but Daniel didn't wait. He didn't look at her. He didn't speak. The silence between them was heavier than any word could be. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered, voice trembling. Daniel exhaled, steady and calm, as if he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. But this wasn't about rehearsing. This was about survival, emotional survival. "Sorry," he repeated quietly, almost to himself. "It's too late." He lifted his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and walked past her. No glance, no hesitation. Every step he took felt like shedding a layer of his former self, like leaving pieces of hope and pain scattered, behind in the house that was never truly his anymore. He paused for a brief second at the threshold. The warm light from inside didn't tempt him. The smell of home didn't lure him back. The familiar sound of her voice didn't hold him. There was nothing left, only clarity. Outside, the night air hit him sharply, cool, unforgiving, and real. The stars above didn't promise comfort. The moon offered no guidance. And yet, Daniel felt a strange sense of freedom. Not joy, not relief, but the quiet, heavy relief of a man who finally stopped holding on to something he couldn't keep. His footsteps echoed on the empty street. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't care. Every direction felt the same. What mattered was the movement, the distance, the act of leaving, because staying meant drowning in memories in a past that had long rejected him. As he walked further, every house, every familiar corner reminded him of what he had lost. Not just Mira, but the illusion of a life he thought he was building. Every sacrifice, every long night abroad, every small joy he had deferred for her, had all led to this singular, painful truth. Days turned into nights, and nights blurred into an endless rhythm of solitude. Daniel wandered without direction, without purpose. The village had become a labyrinth of memories too sharp to touch. Every corner, every familiar place, seemed to whisper stories of what once was, of hope, of promises, of love. He reached the edge of the old forest path, the place he once used to escape as a boy, seeking quiet and clarity. He paused there, leaning against the rough bark of an ancient tree. The wind brushed against his face, carrying the faint scent of grass and earth. For a moment, he closed his eyes, letting the world hold him without judgment. It was in that silence that he first felt the emptiness not as pain, but as space. A space where he could breathe, where he could exist without the weight of a past that no longer belonged to him. Daniel remembered everything he had sacrificed. 4 years of labor, loneliness, hope, everything he had poured into a future that dissolved before his eyes. And yet, he realized none of it was meaningless. Every struggle had shaped him, taught him resilience, patience, and the quiet strength to endure. For the first time, he didn't resent the memories. He didn't curse the laughter he had overheard, the betrayal he had witnessed, or the years he had lost. He simply acknowledged them, accepted them, and let them rest where they belonged in the past. As he walked along the path, Daniel noticed a small stream reflecting the fading sunlight. The water moved continuously, undeterred by obstacles, carving its way through the earth. He watched it for a while, mesmerized. Somehow, it reminded him of himself, still moving forward, despite everything, even if the path wasn't clear. He smiled faintly, a quiet, almost imperceptible smile. Not the joy of fulfillment, but the recognition that he could survive, that he could continue, that perhaps the life ahead, though unknown, could be his own. Daniel stopped at a small clearing and sat down. The sky above stretched wide and open, fading from gold to deep indigo. Stars began to twinkle faintly, unbothered by the small human dramas unfolding below. For the first time in years, he felt perspective, small, insignificant maybe, but free. He thought about Mira, about Adrian, about the life that had been promised to him. He let the thoughts pass like clouds. No anger, no sorrow, just acknowledgement. The night deepened and Daniel rose. He began walking again, each step deliberate, not running from anything but moving toward himself. His past had shaped him, but it would no longer define him. For the first time in a long time, he felt the possibility of choice, of creating a life that belonged to him, no one else, no expectations, no borrowed dreams. And as the wind whispered through the trees, he realized the hardest part had already passed. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the isolation. What remained was only one thing, the quiet, unshakable truth that he could still choose. He could still begin again. Sometimes, losing everything isn't the end. It's the first step toward discovering what you truly want. And Daniel was finally ready to take that step. Days slowly turned into weeks. Daniel had left the village behind. The streets, the houses, the whispers of people, all became distant echoes. He moved to a small town farther away, a place where no one knew him, where the past didn't follow, where he could exist just as himself. The first days were awkward. Every morning he woke up, he felt the weight of absence, the absence of Mira, of the life he thought he would have, and of the familiar surroundings he had once called home. The silence was deafening, but at the same time, strangely liberating. He found a small room to rent, simple but enough. A kitchen, a bed, a tiny window that let in morning light. Nothing luxurious, nothing grand, but it was his alone. Daniel started to work again, this time on his own terms. No long nights that stretched into days for someone else's dreams. No sacrifices that left his body and soul empty. Just honest work. Quiet, steady, and reliable. Evenings were the hardest. That's when memories surfaced. The laughter he had heard, the smell of Mira's home, the dreams he had carried so long. But instead of letting them hurt him, he allowed himself to feel, allowed himself to mourn, allowed himself to grieve. Because healing didn't come from denial, it came from acknowledgement. One night, he walked to the small river near his new home. The water glistened under the moonlight. He knelt beside it, letting his hands brush the cool surface. The water flowed freely, never stopping, never holding back. Daniel realized he had been trying to hold the past like stagnant water, trying to contain it, shape it, and control it. But life, like the river, moved on, and so must he. He sat there for a long time, eyes tracing the ripples, listening to the quiet hum of the night, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to breathe differently. The tension that had gripped his chest for months began to ease. He thought about Mira, about Adrian, about the years he had lost. He let them go, not as a defeat, but as a recognition of reality. He had loved and he had been hurt. That was life. That was human. but life had not ended. Not for him. Daniel stood up, brushing his hands on his pants. The night felt calmer now, almost gentle. He realized that the world wasn't out to hurt him. It simply was, and he had the choice to walk through it, to continue moving, to build again. The process was slow. The pain didn't vanish overnight, but each day he discovered small victories. A smile he didn't force, a laugh that came naturally, a moment of peace while sipping tea in the morning sun. For the first time, Daniel understood that survival wasn't just existing. Survival was choosing to live despite the wounds, to carve a life that was truly his own. And in those quiet, unassuming moments, he began to feel nothing he hadn't in years, hope. Not the naive hope of a boy who believed promises would always hold. Not the desperate hope of a man clinging to love lost, but the steady, patient hope of someone who had seen pain, faced it, and still chose to keep walking forward. Sometimes life's greatest gifts are not in what we keep, but in what we rebuild, and Daniel was beginning to understand exactly what that meant. Weeks passed, and Daniel had begun to feel the rhythm of a life reclaimed. His days were quieter now, less frantic. The constant ache of loss had softened into a dull memory that no longer controlled him. He worked steadily, slept peacefully, and even laughed at small things again. Not often, but enough to remind himself he was still alive. Then one morning, his phone buzzed. A single message from an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment, then opened it. It was from Mira. "I miss you," it read. Daniel stared at the screen. The words blinked back at him. Simple, vulnerable, honest, but they carried weight. The kind of weight that could shatter someone who hadn't already learned to stand alone. For a long time, he didn't respond. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. Every instinct told him to delete, to ignore, to pretend it never existed. But another part of him, the part that had learned from every hardship, every betrayal, every lonely night abroad, paused, observed, reflected. He thought about the years he had spent waiting, hoping, sacrificing. He thought about the moments Mira's laughter had pierced through his longing, only to reveal someone else's presence. He thought about Adrian, about the life he had lost, and then he did something he hadn't done in years. He exhaled slowly, and he felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no desperation, only clarity. Daniel typed a single word in response. Okay. It wasn't cold. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't bitter. It was final. It was the acceptance of someone who had faced the truth and survived. He put the phone down, sat back, let the morning sun warm his face. For the first time, the past didn't control him. The person he used to be, the man who had clung to hope, who had suffered in silence, who had begged for a future that never came, was gone. In its place was someone stronger, someone tempered by fire, someone who had loved deeply, lost painfully, and survived fully. Daniel knew Mira's message wasn't about rekindling anything. It wasn't an apology. It was a reflection of her own regrets and longing. But that no longer had power over him. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the town that was now his own. The streets were quiet. The river glimmered in the distance. The trees swayed softly in the morning breeze. And Daniel smiled, not with the naive joy of a boy in love, not with the desperate hope of a man who clings to a promise, but with the quiet, steady strength of a man who had faced life's harshest truths and had chosen himself anyway. Sometimes the people we lose, the love we can't reclaim, they aren't the end of our story. They are the reminder of what we are capable of surviving. And Daniel, for the first time in years, felt whole again. The days that followed were quiet but full. Daniel woke up each morning without the weight of a past that had once consumed him. The mornings weren't dramatic. The sun didn't rise differently. The streets weren't brighter. But something inside him had shifted. He had learned to carry his own heart, to tend to it gently, and to recognize the strength it took to survive years of hope, betrayal, and waiting. Every step he took in the town, every interaction, every small task became a reminder. Life was his to shape, his to live, his to reclaim. One afternoon, Daniel found himself at the riverside, the same river he had visited weeks before. The water moved steadily, undisturbed by obstacles, carving its path forward. He smiled faintly, realizing it mirrored him, steady, unstoppable, moving forward, no matter how rocky the terrain. He thought about Mira one last time, not with longing, not with anger, not with sorrow, but with acceptance. She had been a part of his story, and now her chapter had closed. He could remember the love, the laughter, the dreams he had carried for her, but it no longer dictated his life. Instead, he focused on the possibilities ahead. A new job offered him stability and satisfaction, small yet meaningful. A few acquaintances turned into friends, people who appreciated him for who he was, not for the sacrifices he had made for someone else. Daniel even started sketching again, a hobby he had abandoned years ago. Each line, each curve, felt like reclaiming pieces of himself that had been buried under hope and heartbreak. And then came the evening when he sat on the small balcony of his modest room. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting warm hues across the sky. Daniel leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the silence embrace him. No regrets, no lingering pain, just a deep, quiet peace. He realized that life's trials had given him clarity. Love, loss, betrayal, sacrifice, they were all part of a journey that had shaped him into someone resilient, self-aware, and capable of creating a life of his choosing. The past wasn't a chain, it was a teacher. The pain wasn't a burden, it was a foundation. Daniel opened his eyes and looked at the horizon. Somewhere far away, Mira lived her life. Adrian too, and that was okay. They didn't define his path anymore. He smiled again, a full, genuine smile, the kind that doesn't need reason or permission, because he had finally understood something profound. Happiness doesn't come from waiting for someone or something to return. It comes from standing tall in your own truth, embracing your own journey, and allowing yourself to move forward, fearless, whole, and free. Daniel exhaled deeply. The cool evening air filled his lungs, and for the first time, he felt truly alive. Sometimes, the end of one story is just the beginning of another, and Daniel was ready. The river flowed, the stars emerged, the world continued, and so did he. And sometimes, surviving the impossible isn't just about endurance. It's about finding the courage to live again on your own terms